Week 8 of Big 12 football brought offensive explosions and nail-biting finishes. We dive into the conference standings to see how it all shook out. And Colorado is set to host the surging Cincinnati Bearcats. We preview that matchup and more right now on Inside the 12. Hello and welcome in to another edition of Inside the 12. Alongside Pete Souza, I'm Madison Hawk. And Pete, once again, it was a really exciting week of Big 12 football.
And you could expect more fireworks this weekend. Some of these games so high stakes could lead us to Arlington. Huge week.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that Arlington just a little over 6 weeks away for that Big 12 championship. We have to start today's show with one of the biggest storylines this week within the conference. Utah assistant coach Andy Ludwig announced Monday he would be stepping down as offensive coordinator for the Utes. That came after the Utes lost 13-7 at home against TCU over the weekend. It was Utah's third straight Big 12 loss. Senior analyst and quarterbacks coach Mike Bajakian is now the interim OC. Pete, with this change, where does Utah go from here?
I think they go forward. Bajakian is a quarterback whisperer, spent 4 years as a quarterbacks coach with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, has a great relationship with Isaac Wilson. Hopefully for the Utes, they will see a lot less of what we're seeing on the screen and some more production.
Yeah, quite the turnaround for Utah, who started the season 4-0, were ranked at one point as high as 10th in the nation. Now they'll look to get back on track when they face Houston this weekend. Well, after two hard-fought wins this past week, BYU and Iowa State now represent two of the remaining 10 undefeated teams in all of college football. BYU ranks 11th this week, and Iowa State, despite getting the win over a really feisty UCF team, they dropped one spot to 10th. When you look at the AP poll, what stands out to you?
Well, I resent you because you were an AP voter once upon a time.
Of course, I'll take it.
But Old Trapper Beef Jerky asks, what's your beef? And I don't know what more the voters want from BYU and Iowa State. Both teams showed grit and toughness this past week, coming from behind in the final moments to get a huge win. Now you ask, what will they do when their back is against the wall? They win. BYU ranks 4th in the nation in strength of record, with Iowa State at 6. Now, if you look at the AP poll, there are 6 one-loss teams ahead of them, and only one of them has a higher strength of record. Both teams have beaten a ranked team, which is more than a couple of those AP top 10 can say. A lot of frustration right now with me, but I think it's past time to give credit where credit is due. Get these guys in the top 10.
Yeah, Pete, I can tell you're really worked up about this, so I'm going to let you cool down.
I see my therapist tomorrow.
Okay, good for you. We're going to roll out the rest of the Week 8 scoreboard. Cincinnati put the brakes on Arizona State's offense for the 24-14 win. How about Kansas State, though? A huge win against West Virginia, 45-18. And I hate to call you out, Pete, but didn't you call the upset on that one?
Hey, I was wrong. We had some kicking problems, and Cincinnati is proving really, though, to be one of those upper echelon teams in the conference, still in the mix for a Big 12 championship appearance.
But when we're taking a look at the scores and looking back on last week, what team or teams surprised you the most?
Well, Baylor and Kansas, they really, I guess you can't say they've arrived, but they show great explosiveness that their fans have been waiting on all season long. Sawyer Robertson, going back into Lubbock, where he's from, led the Bears to a 59-35 win over Texas Tech. He did it with a flawless performance. 5 touchdowns, earning him Big 12 Player of the Week. And then for Kansas, they put 42 points on Houston. Jalen Daniels, let's take a look. Boy, have we been waiting on this. He can run, he can throw, he did both. He was the nation's leader in passing efficiency last week. 16 of 21, 247 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. That is the guy that the team, especially Jeff Grimes, their offensive coordinator, has been waiting on.
Yeah, but to your point, Baylor's 59 points on Saturday were the most by an FBS program in all of Week 8. Statement wins by two teams looking to cause chaos down the final stretch of the season right now. It can be anyone's game. But let's talk big picture now, and let's look at the conference standings. BYU, Iowa State, and Kansas State give the Big 12 3 bowl-eligible teams after 8 weeks, with another 4 teams just 1 win away. This could get kind of crazy when we're talking big picture here. As a reminder, the top 2 teams will face off in the conference championship that's going to be played in Arlington on December 7th. And Pete, we are just a little over 6 weeks away. I want you to walk us through these teams because there have been some parity, but when we're talking about BYU, Iowa State, and Kansas State, it does seem like it is their league to grab. So let's start with Iowa State. When we're talking about the Cyclones, who or what is the it factor for them?
You got to start with defense. They're giving up just 14.4 points a game. They're 7-0, 4-0 in conference play. But here's how they're getting it done. Rocco Beck, their quarterback, he has been so efficient and also has started to make big plays. His father said, Anthony, who was a first-round pick for the Jets, after the game, this game where they came back and won against UCF, his father said, Rocco told me I stunk this week. And he said, you didn't stink. You led your team on a game-winning drive, and those are the type of performances that we need to see from Iowa State and Rocco Beck. He hates to lose, and he's showing intangible qualities. As far as BYU is concerned, last week, another situation where great quarterback play led to a magical win. All game long against Oklahoma State, there was a little bit of struggles. Jake Retzloff did a wonderful job bringing his team back. He's another guy that hates to lose. Everybody in his locker room absolutely loves their quarterback, but in clutch moments, he was exactly what he needed to be, was clutch. Now we talk about Kansas State. Avery Johnson has been sensational. Last week had a hip problem going into this game against West Virginia. He said, okay, I've been doing it with my legs all year long. Now I'll do it with my arm. Avery Johnson has found a way to break down coverages, struggled early in the season against that too-deep zone, has found a way to figure that out. And when you got a guy like DJ Giddings who you're handing the ball off to, I really think you're in good shape. But look at this. The last portion of their schedule, they've really had a front-loaded, difficult schedule. This is doable for Kansas State down the stretch.
Yeah, you make a great case for all three of these teams as we take a look at the remaining schedule through the last 5 weeks. We still have plenty of football left to be played. I do want to point out that on November 30th, Kansas State and Iowa State are going to square off. And as a reminder, Kansas State's only loss was to BYU in week 4. So that just shows the parity across these three teams in the Big 12.
And I don't know that there's a ceiling for Kansas State. Really looking forward to see how high they can go.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they're even close to their ceiling, to your point. And these teams right now are in the driver's seat. They control their own destiny, but there is a group just behind them breathing down their neck. What's the outlook when we're talking about Colorado, Texas Tech, and Cincinnati? As I mentioned earlier, Cincinnati has won 4 of their last 5 games. Could they be getting hot when it really matters?
I think they are, and I think whoever wins that game between Cincinnati and Colorado stays alive for that Big 12 title game. And look, punched in the mouth this past week, Texas Tech. We'll see if they can get up off the mat and make a push for Arlington.
Yeah, and take a look at Cincinnati's remaining schedule, Pete. They still have to face number 10 Iowa State and number 16 Kansas State. I've got to ask you, do you think it's harder for a program who, yes, they're getting hot at the right time in Cincinnati, but is it easier to face those top 25 teams at the beginning of the season or at the end?
I would say at the beginning of the season, because now you've got confidence and momentum on those powerhouses side right now, and that's why we're calling them powerhouses as we head down the stretch.
Yeah, you could make the case, though, that Cincinnati is in a pretty good flow right now. Plenty more ahead on Inside the 12. 7 conference games on the schedule this week. We're going to preview every single one when we come back. Stick with us here on Inside the 12. Welcome back to Inside the 12. 7 games across the league this week that we're going to preview. Iowa State, they are on a bye week. Arizona State also on a bye week as well, but plenty of action. Let's start with BYU and UCF. That's going to be a big game as BYU heads down to Orlando undefeated. However, this matchup is going to be pretty interesting because it does change hourly, it feels like. But as of right now, UCF is favored to win this game in large part because the Knights had 39 rushing attempts for 354 yards on the ground last week. Part of that ground attack is quarterback Ja'Carry Brown. He's a dual threat quarterback who was named starter earlier this week by Gus Malzahn.
Yeah, a huge move for them. And if there is a thing that UCF does very well, it is run the football. 3rd in the nation in rushing yards per game. In this game, you can expect the Knights to look to attack the edges with R.J. Harvey. This aggressive BYU defense got in a little bit of trouble, maybe playing hero ball last week. Oklahoma State last week rushed for 270 yards. possibly revealing a blueprint for the opponent's success. This week, that opponent are the Knights.
We talk about the run game for UCF. Well, how about it with BYU? Running back L.J. Martin is coming off a career day. They're doing really well on the ground right now.
They're doing so well on the ground. L.J. Martin, and you can't forget Jake Retzloff. He has been able to run the football when it counts. That game-winning drive, clutch plays down the stretch. He said it was a spiritual experience. Pretty cool what's happening at BYU.
Yeah, absolutely. They are firing on all cylinders right now. Well, how about Texas Tech at TCU? The Red Raiders making the 3-hour trip to Fort Worth in a matchup of two teams with very different mindsets right now. Texas Tech trying to flush that blowout loss at home to Baylor last week, while TCU is working to build on their shocking win over Utah in Salt Lake City. What stands out to you the most when we're talking about these two teams in this matchup?
Well, the real TCU team, please stand up, right? In an effort to build, you can expect TCU to continue to dial up pressure. The defensive coordinator, Andy Avalos, was able to discombobulate Utah's offense with different types of blitzes. And Dave Aranda used the same approach to confuse Baron Morton last week. Could see more of that. A lot of pressure coming from TCU.
And it's going to be a fun one because this is a cross-state matchup, a cross-state rivalry, so to speak. The winner does get some hardware. It's called the Saddle Trophy, so pun intended. I have to ask you, who has to saddle up in this one to get their team a win?
Taj Brooks has got to do it for Texas Tech. They punted on 4 of their first 5 possessions against Baylor. That's got to change.
It's going to be a fun one. Oklahoma State traveling to Baylor. Baylor fans have a reason to believe, once again, an added spark to the program, if you will, in quarterback Sawyer Robertson. What has impressed you the most with him?
Well, he's a precision passer, and he's thrown for 3 or more touchdowns in 3 straight games. And let's face it, Baylor has a quarterback. That's exciting for their fans.
As for Oklahoma State, Garrett Rangel, who started in place of Alan Bowman last week, will be out for the rest of the season with a broken collarbone. Where do the Cowboys go from here?
Well, I don't think it matters who's going to be the quarterback. You can bet that Dave Aranda is going to stick 8 guys in the box and force the quarterback, whoever that is, probably Alan Bowman, to beat the Bears. Ollie Gordon actually got going and showed those skills that make him probably the best running back in the Big 12 draft class last week against BYU. Look for Baylor to really try to shut that down, stacking 8-9 guys in the box.
No doubt about it. When Ollie Gordon is going, this offense for the Cowboys completely different. West Virginia traveling to Arizona. Neil Brown says it's too early to tell if Garrett Green will be able to go in Tucson. He left the Kansas State game with an upper body injury, but hopefully he is able to play.
Yeah, if Green can't go, look for West Virginia to lean heavily on the run game with C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White. They're going to try to grind it out on the ground for a win.
It's hard to believe, but this is actually the first ever matchup between these two teams. They both need a win badly. So I have to ask you, what do the Wildcats need to do to snap their 3-game skid?
Next man up. All 3 of their defensive captains are actually hurt right now. They're injured for Arizona. Now, on offense, it's time to acknowledge the fact that Noah Fafita is struggling. He has more interceptions than touchdown passes. His completion percentage has dropped below 60%. He's among the FBS leaders in fumbles and sacks. They have to run the football right now to try to get their footing.
Yeah, absolutely have to try and find some momentum as well. Coming up next, Colorado is set to welcome Cincinnati to Folsom Field for a showdown under the lights. More on Inside the 12 when we come back. Welcome back to Inside the 12. Madison Hawk alongside Pete Souza. We're going to continue previewing the big matchups within the league this weekend. Utah traveling to Houston, as we mentioned at the top of the show. Big news out of Utah earlier this week with offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig stepping down.
Yeah, Kyle Whittingham addressed the fact, as far as the game plan is going to go, that there's not going to be a wholesale change. Interim coach Mike Bajakian is taking over as interim OC, I should say, and he's on the same page. He knows what is going on with that Utah offense, and he's worked very closely with Isaac Wilson. I don't think you can overstate how big a deal that is.
As for Houston, they named Zion Chris the starter just 2 weeks ago. He did leave Saturday's game against Kansas after the first quarter with a hamstring quad injury. He did not return. How do they respond this week?
Regardless of who plays quarterback, Willie Fritz has mentioned his guys up front need to be better at the point of attack. They just need more cohesion on their offensive line. That's not an easy task against a physical Kyle Whittingham defense. One more is it got to be better in the red zone. Houston has been under 60%, 57% in the red zone. That's one of the worst in the country.
Well, moving on, next up, an in-state rivalry game between Kansas and Kansas State. Kansas State has won 15 straight games against Kansas, but the way this season is going within the conference, anything can happen. You can't get too comfortable focusing on the past or even really talking much about that streak.
The kids in Kansas on either roster are pumped for this game, and whatever Chris Kleiman is doing, it seems to have been working. The Sunflower Showdown, his team has won. You mentioned those past 15 games, but they've won 12 of them by more than 10. As far as the game plan goes, Kansas rushed for 223 yards and 3 touchdowns against Houston, but Devin Neal and company will be facing a much different attack defensively against Kansas State.
Okay, to your point, speaking of that Kansas State run defense, it's the best in the Big 12. It's also a top-ranked defense nationally. How have they been able to stay so disciplined?
Well, improved communication on the back end, really. They've been able to play more zone defense, more man-to-man defense, and that has enabled them to drop maybe a safety in the box against a good rushing team like Kansas. Look for that to happen. Also, look at your Twitter. All kinds of talk between these two teams before this game. You gotta love a big rivalry.
I love it. Is it Twitter or X? Where are we going there? Yeah, who knows these days.
You.
All right, our last game to preview, Cincinnati at Colorado. Big news heading into this game. Travis Hunter will be a go. He is ready to play after leaving the last 2 games with injuries. Good sign for a team who, get this, just 1 win away from bowl eligibility.
And Coach Prime says Hunter has a little more giddy up in his step. Can you imagine that? He's hitting a little bit. Coach Prime has been at some more explosive plays from his Heisman candidate.
Yeah, I'd probably have some giddy up if I was considered a Heisman candidate as well. The winner of this game will remain alive in the hunt for a Big 12 title spot. Cincinnati coach Scott Satterfield mentioned that the game comes with the type of opportunity this team has worked all season to achieve.
Yeah, Coach Satterfield says he will look to keep Shedeur Sanders flustered with different coverages and blitz packages. The Bearcats coach says allowing him to stay in the pocket could absolutely kill Cincinnati. The Godfather, Dante Corleone, keep an eye on him for the Bearcats. He could be a difference maker. He gets pressure up the middle with his 6'1" and 320-pound frame. He keeps the run stuffed. All that could keep Sanders and the high-octane Buffaloes offense in check. Huge opportunity for Cincinnati.
Absolutely. I will say it's probably easier said than done to get Shedeur Sanders flustered, but Cincinnati, a team that can do it as they're hot right now, winning 4 of their last 5 games. We've gone through the matchups, and when we come back, a former Cincinnati Bearcats quarterback who knows plenty about winning is going to join the show to pick this week's winners. All that and more coming up on Inside the 12. Welcome back to Inside the 12. Time now for our last segment of the show, our favorite segment, of course. It's first time to take a look back at last week's picks before we take this week's picks. I really don't think we need to focus much on the Week 8 picks.
I think we can a little bit. How about that? 20-14, top dog. All right, we'll see how Tony Pike can do.
Yeah. Speaking of Tony Pike, let's bring in today's guest picker, who is a Cincinnati Bearcats legend. Emphasis on legend. He was a quarterback for Cincinnati who won back-to-back Big East titles and had an undefeated season in 2009. Pete mentioned him. Tony Pike, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited, and I know that things are going well for the Bearcats if we're getting the opportunity to do this. So that's a win-win for me.
Well, let's see how you do in wins with this week's picks. We're going to start in Orlando with number 11 BYU traveling to UCF. Kickoff for that one is at 3:30 Eastern on ESPN. Who do you have in this one?
You know, the bounce house is a little bit shaky right now because of the way this team has played. KJ Jefferson had so much excitement going into the season, and they were so close to the upset last week. I just think that's so deflating for UCF. I'm a quarterback guy. I trust BYU's quarterback more right now, so I think BYU goes on the road and gets a win.
I'm going exactly with what Tony said. Quarterback play BYU.
Yeah, this was a tough one for me, but I'm going with BYU as well. Moving on, Texas Tech at TCU, 3:30 on Fox Eastern time, I should say. Tony, who do you like in this one?
You know, I'm going with Texas Tech here, probably because I made the road trip to Texas Tech and I saw how well they played against the Bearcats earlier in the season. But this is about Taj Brooks for me. If you're going to go on the road and win in the Big 12, you got to be able to do it with the ground game. I think they rely on Taj Brooks, and I think Texas Tech gets an upset.
Texas Tech.
Yep, Texas Tech. I think we can all agree on that one. Oklahoma State at Baylor, 3:30 Eastern on ESPN+. Who do you like in this one?
Baylor with an impressive win last week. Oklahoma State has been one of the bigger disappointments in the Big 12 and in college football. Again, a team that was close to pulling off the upset against BYU. I just think there's lasting effects from that. Now they got to go on the road to Baylor. I think Baylor doubles up here after a big win last week and knocks off Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a Baylor team that's better than people think right now. I like Baylor.
Okay, this was hard for me as well, but I am going to go with Oklahoma State on this one. I just feel like they're due for a big win, so the Cowboys have my pick in this one. West Virginia at Arizona, that's at 7 o'clock Eastern on FS1. Who are you feeling in this one?
This is a hard one for me because early in the season, I loved the way Arizona was playing, especially that win over Utah. But lately, it feels like they're trending in the wrong direction. And this is the time of year where you think if West Virginia's going to start to piece it together, it'll be now. I don't know if Arizona bounces back from that loss to Colorado. And I think that said more about Colorado than Arizona. But I'm going to take West Virginia with the upset here.
Arizona for me.
Ooh, I'm going West Virginia on this one. Moving on, Utah at Houston, 7 o'clock kick on ESPN+. Who do you like in this one, Utah or Houston?
Utah has dealt with so many issues this season. Obviously, Cam Rising is out, which means that they got to fill a void on the offensive side of the ball. But I've seen this Houston team in person. They're just not there offensively. I think Utah can score enough, and I still believe in that Utah defense to get the win on the road.
Yeah, if there's a team that has more question marks than Utah, it is Houston on the offensive side of the ball. I like Utah.
Okay, I'm going with Utah as well. Moving on, Kansas at number 16, Kansas State. This is a big rivalry game, 8 o'clock kick on ESPN2. Who do you like in this one?
And when the schedule came out, I was so excited for this because Kansas had playoff aspirations going into the year, and it's been a disappointment. But Avery Johnson for Kansas State has not been a disappointment. He has stepped right into the quarterback role. And again, as we started with BYU, UCF, I'm a quarterback guy. I'm going to ride the quarterback who I think can propel his team, and I think Avery Johnson does that with Kansas State in a rivalry game.
Yeah, I'll go with Kansas State as well in this one.
Kansas State for me as well, to your point, because of Avery Johnson. Last but certainly not least, the big one, Cincinnati at Colorado. This game's going to be a lot of fun. 10:15 kick on ESPN. Who do you like in this one? I feel like that's a loaded question for you as a Cincinnati guy.
Deion has ties to Cincinnati. He spoke at Big 12 Media Day that this game sold out in the summer. He spoke very highly of Cincinnati, and there's certainly a respect. But I talked to my co-host and my good friend Mo Egger this week, and Mo said, I think that Colorado has the best two players in the game. Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders are the best two players on the field. But I think if you put the rest of the players in a pool, I think the next 4, 5, 6 best players come on the Cincinnati side of the ball. Colorado's going to score. They're way too talented to not score. But I think UC defensively, being in these big games before, they've played in a lot of close games. They've played in road games in the Big 12 in raucous environments. I like UC because I like Brendan Sorsby in this offense to score more points than Colorado on the road.
I like the call back to Deion as a Cincinnati Red, but I'm going to go with Colorado.
Oh, okay. This was another hard game for me to pick, but I'm going with Cincinnati as well. I really like the Bearcats right now, rolling, winning 4 of their last 5 games, so Cincinnati has my pick. Tony, thanks so much for joining us. We'll find out next week on Inside the 12 how you did on your picks, but thanks for joining the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, going to be another really exciting week of Big 12 football. Hard to believe, just 5 regular season games left. Thanks so much for joining us here on Inside the 12. Enjoy your college football weekend.